On Kiwi. Well, a production called A Thousand Hills, an African story from New Zealand, is kicking off this week at the Herald Theatre in Auckland City, an exploration of the beauty and terror of a life lived in exile, coming to the Herald Theatre. We were hoping to have one of the actors in it. In fact, it's based, I think, around his life, Francois Biamana, but we do indeed have Mike Hudson, who is the writer behind this one, in the Kiwi studio. Morning, Mike.
Oh, good morning, Howard.
Really nice to have you in. So you've been working on this production for a number of years now, haven't you?
This has been a slow process. I probably met Francois 3 to 4 years ago, and from that has evolved what was going to be just a one-man story, or a sort of a one-man show. It's now evolved into an 8-member cast, big musical sort of production in many ways. So, yeah, it's been a long time, but it's been very exciting.
And when did you meet Francois?
I met him through this program called Mix It, which is part of at the Performing Arts Centre, which is the centre just opposite the zoo in Auckland. And the Mix It is a sort of a refugee program run by this brilliant woman called Wendy Preston. And she basically gets refugees in who, rather than just doing the whole sort of language stuff like that, she puts in arts and performing arts, and they do a whole lot of program. And she'd been doing this for a few years, and it was a terrific program. And my wife and I, who's actually the director, Margaret Mary Hollins, we met Francois, a very gregarious guy, very charismatic, and behind all his charm, we started talking. And over the time, he had this story to talk about Rwanda, but more than just his story. The whole story of being a refugee, being a Rwandan, and following some of the situations that happened there. So that's how it all started.
So it's really a story of I suppose, of two halves: the situation back in Rwanda, and then how he came to be here and his life here as well.
It's the story itself is actually based on his life, based on it as well. Once we met Francois, he said, "Well, you must meet Bob. Bob Askew is this New Zealand guy. He's actually a Yorkshireman, been here for about 20, 30 years, but he was the Red Cross worker who helped enormously getting Francois out." And then I started meeting both of them. We had this amazing weekend together just talking. And we realised that this is a huge story. And what was really interesting from the New Zealand perspective was, aid workers working in ethically very challenging places, making some very tough decisions, and the work that they were doing. And he was actually, Bob was a water sanitation expert. So his job very simply was to get the water flowing in this refugee camp. And he had to get a translator. He needed someone to help him on the camp itself, and he met Francois. And together this friendship evolved. And it's kind of touching on that story, but also the people, because as Bob and Francois would be the first to say, it's not just one person.
Yeah.
It's a huge world, and that's what we're capturing.
And when you say, that decision-making that needs to be made in these terrible situations, are you talking about the idea that you need to choose between who can leave and who can stay and that sort of thing? Who can come to New Zealand?
Very much. Well, the thing is, the process of becoming a refugee is effectively first of all, to leave the camp was quite tricky. Bob had some real issues too with getting him out, because in theory, the policy of a Red Cross worker is impartiality. Also,
because everyone there's in the same plight, right?
Very much. The camp. To give you a little bit of potted history, you've got the genocide. So you've got 3 months of virtually what Francois describes as a slaughter.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, it was Hutu against Hutu. It's quite a little bit complicated history, but basically Hutu were the dominant, shall we say, tribe. Systematically had been sort of, through propaganda, had become to realise that the Tutsi were effectively an inferior sort of tribe or inferior people, and the government and peoples behind that manipulated their people and it just exploded into this outpouring of absolute bloodshed. So 800,000 people killed, not just Hutu, not just Tutsi. It was a mixture of a lot of people, a lot of revenge stuff, horrible stuff. And to actually try to capture African politics or Rwandan politics in a nutshell. Anyway, following that, there's a mass exodus of people getting out of Rwanda. And they poured into places like Burundi and Zaire, which is now known as Congo.
Including the perpetrators as well, right?
This is where it gets really interesting. And that's what fascinated me as a writer, because I suppose from a white middle class head, I'm sort of New Zealand boy going, oh yeah, good guys, bad guys, and you get talking and you go, no, there's the good guy, bad guy is so blurred, because when Tutsi came back in to take over again, they did some awful things as well. But the camps itself were full of very interesting. Were full of a lot of the refugees, but also full of a lot of the guys who were involved with the killing in the first place. And so you've got this amazing complications, which make it which I like as a writer. I love that kind of template, because the world is not black and white. It's very confusing, and you've got people like, especially Red Cross workers, whose policy is impartiality, a sort of neutrality, going in there and not taking sides, and it's really hard to not take sides because you're thrown against some really weird situations, and it's a very dangerous situation too.
So at the end of the day, in Francois' situation and the character Philippe, you've only really got a friendship to sort of hang things on. Friendship between him and the aid worker. Yeah,
he also was surrounded by some great aid workers who helped him a lot. But basically, Bob was like a 40-year-old man, and he goes into the situation with he volunteered for the Red Cross, and that's a 2-year process of kind of grooming almost, and not being paid either. So he goes over there with the best intentions, and they say, "Oh, by the way, Bob, your first mission's going to be," and he ends up in this heavyweight, which is post-Rwanda. So he ends up in the Red Cross camp. Francois was a great translator. He had 5 or 6 languages up his sleeve. He was able to move amongst the people. But then Bob needed someone to help him get staff together, because basically what they were doing is getting the water from, because there was issues of cholera, there was all sorts of problems with flowing water. At one stage, Goma, which is virtually a tiny little town on the borders of Zaire and Rwanda, there was close to 1 million refugees. Bang! It's like Francois describes it as a bit like Rugby World Cup night, opening night. Yeah, the chaos of that. Right. But they just didn't leave. Yeah. And you double, triple that, and you've got this whole, so everything's just falling apart. And then, so the camps, then they had to split them off into camps, and then they had issues of water. So what Bob's was doing was getting water from underground systems in the cave. So it's very interesting. And this sounds all doom and gloom, because the play itself is actually very much a celebration of the human spirit. We've got a lot of music in there. We've got a huge amount of it. We've got some wonderful...
live music? Or
Yeah, because we've got Yao Boateng. He's from a band called Zozo, who may have been in town, yeah. And he brings this, which when I write, if I find the musical thing first almost, somehow that helps with my rhythm. I did a play a few years ago called Beautiful Losers, which was based on Jack Kerouac's life and Neil Cassidy, the whole sort of beat writers. And when I got all that jazz and bebop going under, it helps my writing. And same with Thousand Hills, we really touched on the whole Fela Kuti, Tumani Debati, people like that, and they bring in this incredible beauty and rhythm and stuff like that. And even though it's more not specific to Rwanda, because you've got Nigerian and Pan-African music used, it just drives the story. And the music, and then we've got Yao, and then he's just a real aficionado of Fela Kuti. He just loves that stuff, and but it's a whole other thing with his drumming, because he's bringing in, he's talking about the whole spirituality of the drumming. He's the djembe drumming, he's just a whole other thing.
So how do you end up representing such a vast kind of epic scale story onto a stage?
That's the decision of the director working with the set design. We've got John Variety. He's been working around for years, Auckland Theatre Company guy. He's worked for a lot of other people. Yeah, very experienced, and in many ways less is more. We've got quite a natural, quite a simplistic set. We've used Elizabeth Whiting again for costume. There was this whole, at the end of the day, the world itself, the camp itself was fairly, sort of rudimentary. You're talking about a lot of it was like tarpaulins. So we're creating this world. But we do slip back. It's not all doom and gloom, because we're focusing on the world prior to that as well. So we've got to sort of go back into the life of Francois prior to that. His character, actually, Philippe, and showing the beauty of growing up in Rwanda prior to that. So it's quite a simplistic set, but it's going to be very evocative.
Will the audience see themselves, particularly in the part where Philippe, the character, is here in New Zealand and adjusting to life here? Will the audience see themselves reflected back in some ways in the way that New Zealanders react to refugees? I
think we don't want to give away too much at the ending, but we do bring... There is an end which basically brings in New Zealand. And the thing that always intrigued me as a writer for this was that we talk about the hope and human spirit and the human condition and all these kind of issues. The thing that really interests me was when you hear someone say, he was saved or being saved. And I found that kind of interesting word, or saved, he was saved, but it's never perfect endings. It's like, it's an
ongoing thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
There is no ending.
You're saved from one situation, but then another story starts. So that's why I always found that interesting, the idea of being saved. Yeah. And And Francois, his situation now, he's been there 10 years, and he's actually the beginning of a whole other journey.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's happening at the Herald Theatre. The preview night is Thursday, I suppose.
Thursday night,
out. Yeah.
and opening night's Friday, and then we've got a Saturday, I think Sunday, because of the Rugby World Cup and Labour Weekend, Sunday, Monday, there's no shows. But then after that, we go right through to the 30th, I think it is. Yeah. So
cool.
It's basically the 20th. Yeah, it's all at the Herald Theatre at the.
And there's a schools performance. Is that already dealt to? Or?
Getting busy,
Yep,
but
cool.
that's at 2 p.m. So that'll be the first week of term. So, but a really interesting play for especially for students, because I'm also a teacher as well, because probably about year 8, year 9 and up would be perfect for this. I mean, we touch on some big stuff, but it's not a. We're not going into the grim details. Far from it. It's more post the whole world that's been in. So some of those students around, especially the 19-year-old year 10s, would find it really interesting, some of the politics.
And so if you want to know where the Herald Theatre, of course, that's at the Aotea Centre. So bookings through the Edge, 0800 buy tickets or buytickets.co.nz. Mike Hudson has been my guest, the writer of 1,000 Hills. Thanks very much for coming on in.
Thank you.